What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Bogey Free. Tonight, I will be hosting instead of Matt Jones. I am Axis, and we are brought to you today by FTNBets.com. I already mentioned, unfortunately, Matt couldn't be with us, but as always, Alex is joining me to talk a little Charles Schwab Challenge and the Colonial Country Club. What's going on, Alex?
How's it going? It's sort of nice to get back to a week where we have a regular course fit model. It's been, I think, 3 consecutive weeks prior to this one where there wasn't enough data to work with. So it's nice to get back into the regular routine there, even though we're going from a major to just another tournament.
Yeah, the majors are always funny because obviously we love them and they're majors, but it is a different ball game as far as the predicting goes. Normally, if we do have data, it's old. So, but just to touch on that real quick, I mean, I understand why the casual golf fan may not have loved what was happening Sunday until late, but I feel like anyone who follows golf had to have found some fun in that, right? Like we're familiar
Mhm.
with Zalatoris enough, Mito, Cam Young. Like, sure, those aren't the names you're used to seeing at a major, but I mean, eventually things do turn over a little bit. It was kind of wild that they're all playing the KFT just over a year ago.
Okay.
Um, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt really bad for Mito, obviously. I didn't have any action on either of those two. I was rooting hard, as were you, for Cam Young to
Yeah.
figure that out. But yeah, I understand Sunday's excitement was brought more from melting, but I mean that's part of golf and that's part of learning it, right?
Yeah. And also, like, I think it's important to note that, yeah, they made bogeys and they made mistakes at crucial times, but it's not like they were playing significantly worse rounds than most of the field, right? Like,
Right.
JT still had to play one of the best rounds of the entire day to get it done. So I think I've heard a lot of that narrative that it's like, oh, he was gifted that one because he missed some putts down the stretch. First of all, it's not like he missed 4-footers, right? Like, he missed makeable putts that have a less than 50% make rate. That's not choking on the greens by any stretch.
Right.
And then I think the other point there is, like, those holes are really really difficult golf holes, and they were
Yeah,
playing in
18
tough
is
conditions.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like because JT was playing those holes so well and was so dialed in that it just made, like, a lot of people sort of have the wrong impression of how those holes were actually playing during the day. So yeah, I think that's like been my biggest takeaway. Is sort of disappointing that people think that this one was gifted to him instead of he came back and won it. And and yeah, that's like that's really my only gripe with the event. I thought it was a very very fun event, very challenging golf course. I felt like it really held up. I was a little bit concerned, like, with how easy it played Friday afternoon, but then on the weekend it played exactly as challenging as we would have hoped. So yeah, I was pleased.
Yeah, and just to touch on that real quick too, I think it goes back even a step further. Like a lot of fans my age, I'm 34, you grow up through the Tiger era and you're just used to him winning when he had a lead. And you
Yeah.
see it even in regular events, like people lose and like, oh, he choked, oh, he gave it away. It's like, well, no, pretty well everybody with Tiger, that's not an easy thing to close a tournament, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just, and I think those expectations, especially on someone like Zalatoris, who we've seen in a few close ones now. Like it'll happen. I mean, yeah, he may not ever be a like prolific winner because of some of his struggles, but there really aren't that many prolific winners. And I think we're just so quick to try to crown people as the next this and that. Especially, with Spieth came out, JT young in his career, 15
Yeah.
wins. Like it does happen. I think sometimes as fans, we get a little overzealous on these. Oh, look, like Scheffler's. Then is he going to push for the major record? And he struggled on what was his favorite course supposedly in the world. We heard all about like these things happen. It's a tough game. You can't help the weather sometimes. Yeah, it drives me nuts sometimes on not even just social media. You hear announcers talking about it, and it's like I think our vision is skewed on what this expectation is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also add to that, like, the other unique thing about Tiger is he's one of the only golfers in history who actually has a sample size in
Right.
in contention. Like, for example, Morikawa and Scheffler, like, yeah, they have closed the deal a ton, and we've basically anointed them as winners and they're guys who are going to get it done each time. But we only have a handful of examples of that. Like if they're in contention 10 more times in the next 2 years, should we be confident that they're going to close the deal at a higher rate than most people? No, they could each go 0 for 10 or 1 for 10 in their next 10 big time opportunities. And we shouldn't be surprised because we just don't know anything. We can't conclude anything in such a small sample. The one thing we can do is we can look at like how they've gotten it done. So for example, we can look at Morikawa and say, okay, he has a very clear process of how he's picking targets, and he does an outstanding job with distance control, and he continues to hit to the fat side of green under pressure. Like his decision making process doesn't change under pressure. So okay, there are signs there that he really can get it done at a greater rate than most people.
Right.
But like it's still such a small sample, and there's still so much variance in the moment there that the next time he's in contention, if he fails, we shouldn't be surprised because that's just golf.
Right. So, yeah. Anyway, so we'll move on to Colonial. Well, I call it Colonial. Charles Schwab Challenge at Colonial. A decent amount of of solid golfers stayed in the area. It's a quick little
Mhm.
trip down from Tulsa to Fort Worth. We've seen Colonial, I think, since 1946. It's a par 70, roughly 7,200 yards. Pretty classical course from what you read about. So I'll let you dive in just real quick. I went back the last 3 years. The driving distance was about 280 yards, all drives. The driving accuracy about 55%. And then I went and looked. The green and regulations from the fairway 77%, and the green and regulation from the rough is 50%, both of which were pretty well tour average. So I'll let you dive in a little bit. I did read your course fit article, which is up on FTN Daily. For subscribers to get more in depth, but I'll let you give a brief overlook of your thoughts.
Yeah, so I sort of mentioned at the top of the show, like it's nice to have a real course fit model again, and so we certainly have plenty of data. This is a strong course fit model. However, it's not a very fun one. Like I love it when either aspect of driving, whether it's distance or accuracy off the tee, really pops. I love it when we have a big spike week for around the green play because I think that's often overlooked. And then, of course, I love it when strokes gained putting is not very predictive because it's by far the most volatile and the most variant. So when strokes gained putting is predictive, it can be pretty annoying because you then have to rely on like the most volatile aspect of the game coming through for you if you're really following exactly what the model is saying. But that's what we have this week. So we have driving distance almost not predictive at all. It's just a 4.3% weight. That's the lowest I've seen from driving distance since coming up with the strokes gained driving accuracy metric about a couple months ago. So very disappointing there. And yet we don't see like an inverse relationship there. Like typically in weeks when driving distance has been less predictive than usual, it's been because driving accuracy has been significantly more predictive. That's not the case. Driving accuracy this week is just about tour average, as is approach play, and then a slight bump to around the green play and a bump to putting from a predictive standpoint as well. So as I said, like it's not an overly enticing model, but all we can do is play the hand that we're dealt, and that's what we're dealt this week. So the one thing I will say in favor of this one that's encouraging is at least this is a unique model, and so we will be able to find some guys who are course fit specialists. And if you're somebody who's just looking at recent form or even long-term form, and you're not adjusting for the way this golf course challenges players differently from others, that will still allow us to find some contrarian plays who really do project well.
Yeah, I found very similar to what you said. Off the tee was slightly less than tour average, and again, I had a slight lean to accuracy, but it wasn't anything crazy. I don't think you have to be Ches Reavie out there hitting literally everything, and you don't want to be him with distance either. Around the green was close to tour average. Putting, I did see the slight uptick in, as well as approach. So, like you said, it's kind of boring, but if you know this going in, a DFS is a little different, obviously, than betting. Like I like to keep them very separate. I know some people mix together some things can overlap, but like
Mhm.
from a DFS perspective, like you mentioned, there are enough different things where you just have to understand you're wading into a little bit of variant waters by, bumping putting up on something that you may care about more this week.
Yeah.
Like last week, Cam Smith, one of the best putters in the world, just didn't have it. I think I heard he led the field in strokes gained tee to green. He missed the most putts inside of 15 feet, I believe. It was up to 16 at one point or something wild. Somebody posted that on Twitter, but that's what you're talking about though. Obviously, Cam Smith's a good putter. He just had an off week, and when you have an off week with putting, it can really throw off your overall scoring.
Mhm.
So just know that, especially on the DFS side, when it comes to betting, it's a little safer in a sense because, guys have bad putting weeks. If you bet on a few guys based on some of the putting, well, it's just one bet. It's one loss. It doesn't tank your entire week necessarily if you're betting across different markets. So I did bump putting and irons just a little bit from my baseline stuff, but nothing wild this week for me at Colonial.
I think you made a really good point there, and I'll sort of build on it in saying, like, if you're looking at the course fit projections page that we have at FTN, you'll notice that there's a course fit expected strokes gain number, and then there's a baseline strokes gain number, and I would lean in the betting market a little bit heavier on the baseline numbers. Whereas in the DFS market, particularly where you see a deviation from ownership, you can lean a little bit heavier on the course fit expected strokes gain number. So, for example, like somebody like Brian Harmon, I have at just 0.76 baseline strokes gained, 1.14 course fit expected strokes gained. So if he is a really contrarian play, I'm going to really look to that course fit specialist narrative and go towards him. Whereas if he's chalk, now I'm sort of going back in the opposite direction, saying, okay, if everyone is on this guy, but from a baseline talent perspective, I've got other guys in that range like Harold Varner, like Chris Kirk, even Sebastian Munoz, Tom Hoagie, Cameron Tringali, who project a little bit better than he does, who are better golfers on a neutral golf course, then maybe I'm going to go away from Harmon towards them. So you can really use that distinction to kind of identify good chalk and bad chalk, as well as the really good contrarian plays.
Right. I agree with that totally. You just, again, I know it's mainly a betting show, but there's just so many points to bring up sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
I just would really hope people can start to learn. Like, I know when I first got into it, I really kind of treated DFS and betting the same in a sense of like, I just
Mhm.
treated my research for them the same. You build a betting card, like I'm using those same guys in DFS. And like I said, there's some overlap sometimes, but they truly are two different things, two different outcomes, two sets of expectations. There's game theory in DFS that doesn't exist in betting. There's so much different. I try to tell as many people, keep them separate. Yes, you might bet a guy and play him. That's totally fine. But like the process to getting there is probably should be a little different than simply, I bet this guy, I have to play this guy type of thing. So just
Yeah,
wanted to throw that out
absolutely.
there.
And I think like another way to put that is it's certainly fine if your independent processes lead you to the same guy in both DFS
Correct.
and betting, but that should be the reason. It shouldn't be like, oh, I'm using him on DraftKings and therefore I'm also going to bet him because if he wins and helps my lineup, I don't want to feel like a dope for not also betting him. That's
Right.
right. That fear of missing out type of mindset is not the way you want to be betting or playing DFS. You could reverse that exact thing. So it's just like, make sure you have a process in place for each. And if the process for each brings you to the same guy in both places, that's of course okay.
And it will, because the
Mhm.
salaries are correlated with the odds for the most
Yeah.
part. And you mentioned too, like it's the same thing as like I bet T20s, T40s, T10s that I don't necessarily have an outright on either. And I know a lot of people are like, "Why?" Like last week, actually, it was Mito. I had a positional wager and I didn't have him to outright. And it's like, well, normally sometimes I align throughout the ladder, but not always. And it's like I'm not
Yeah.
going to bet the outright at a number I don't think is expected value for me. Like I saw some numbers on Twitter that if I could have found them, I would have, but it just wasn't there. So I didn't do it. And eventually I feel like that's a comfort level you kind of have to get to and be like, it's okay. I'm going to miss some occasional guys when I bet just the T20. And occasionally I hit winners though, that I had no positional bets on. Like it's just, it's a comfort thing. It's hard to get used to. Like I used to have like the automatic like T5 and winner. Let's go like that. And eventually you start doing the probabilities and everything. You're like, this type of player, just that's not suited to him. And I'm burning money doing this. So with that though, we'll get into some of our outrights. I'll let you lead it off. We do have one overlap, which we will get to, but if you want to go over maybe just your top two for now, and then I'll do two and we'll get back to you. So if you want to start with your top two on the board.
Yes, my first one is a guy who really hasn't been playing very well, and honestly, like if I hadn't done that analysis on the relevant samples for each strokes gain metric that I did a few weeks ago, where I found that outside of driving accuracy, you really don't gain anything looking at the last 20 rounds versus the last 50 for any other category. And so if I hadn't done that, Daniel Berger would not look very good. Instead, he still projects as one of the better golfers in this field. I have him at 1.35 strokes gained baseline, which is fifth on this slate. And he's at 1.54 course fit expected strokes gained, which is third on this slate. So projects very well in both cases. And not that surprising when you look at his baseline strokes gained profile. Gains 0.7 per round with his approach. That's one of the best in the field. I believe it's the fourth best in the field. Also very solid around the green. He does drive the ball pretty well, particularly accurately off the tee. So he's somebody who maybe benefits a little bit, at least compared to most of the elite players in the field, from driving distance not mattering as much. And then, he certainly struggles at times with the putter, but the long-term baseline is still plus 0.13. So basically, this is just a bet that he's too good for his 41-to-1 price on FanDuel. It's a bet that he's just like too good for this field to be ranked anywhere close to where he is in terms of the odds board. Like I have him, as I mentioned, as a top 5 player in this field. No matter how you look at it, he's just not priced anywhere close to that. So yes, he's been struggling, but that is fully priced into his odds, and I would say that it's over emphasized in his odds, and so I'll just sort of bet on the positive regression towards his own baseline and hope he wins.
Yeah, I was close on Berger. I made a number close to market. I was a little more down, I think, especially if you take into how bad he was at Southern Hills, and that's the thing you have to be a little careful of with recent form in golf. Like, yes, some form does carry, but like that was an abnormally bad 2 rounds for him. And specifically, I can't remember which one. I think his Friday was horrific, if I recall. Like he lost just over 4 strokes total in 2 rounds like that. You go back through his career, I'd be hard pressed to find anything remotely close to that bad for him. So really you have to ask yourself, like, okay, they dealt with weather. Like, I'm not saying necessarily strike it, but you have to take that in mind. And I think if you're waiting recent form rounds and you're not looking at like just things like that, it's going to throw off your model. I think Daniel Berger is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and I think you can like sort of break it down even more and say, like, that's probably one of the reasons why that research I did found that outside of driving accuracy, you just don't gain anything looking at the last 20 instead of the last 50, because you get these sort of outlier performances that in a larger sample, like when you get to 50 rounds, is going to be drowned out, but in 20, it's not. And then the other thing you can do is you can look at like, okay, how did he lose? Well, he still gained 3/4 of a stroke per round off the tee. We know that's where he's good. He lost with his irons, but more importantly, he lost almost 4 strokes per round putting.
Yeah.
And when you think about like exactly the conditions that he had to play in, the extreme wind and the cold on these undulating greens, that it seemed like a lot of guys were having difficulty reading them. Like, as you put it, like I would just toss that out. I would just strike it out almost out of the record. And that's sort of what the model is doing, because it's looking at just last 50 rounds for putting instead of last 20, in which case even such a terrible performance where he lost over 7 strokes putting in 2 rounds, it's just kind of drowned out, and it's not going to affect the baseline projection much at all. And that's exactly how we want it to be factored in. And so I'm very pleased with that aspect of the model now, I feel a lot more confident in the baseline projections for these guys, and that then makes me feel like it's a lot easier for me to pull the trigger on somebody like Berger, where 3-4 weeks ago, maybe I would have been a little hesitant because I wouldn't have known exactly how to treat this poor recent form. And now I feel like I'm much more equipped to do so. And I think like we can also add to that by saying, if you remember at the Masters, like he made the cut, he was playing well, and then just had a terrible weekend, or may have even just been a terrible round on the weekend. And so you have like maybe 2, 3, 4 rounds in his last 20 that are just completely tanking his numbers. And yet he's played pretty good golf outside of that. It was T21 at the Heritage, gained 1.7 strokes per round with his irons. That's exactly what we're looking for from him. We know that when he's at his best, it's because he's dominating with the irons. He was 4th at the Honda, 13th at the Players. Like, he's still Daniel Berger. And I think like it's a really important point to make that, a lot of the time the numbers, especially if you're just looking at recent form, they're going to paint a different picture than the one you should have. And that's why it's really helpful to have those like models in place that are giving you baseline projections that are doing a good job of not weighing recency too much.
Yeah, and if you're pulling your own stats, like unfortunately a lot of people probably can't do this who are watching, and I understand that. I still throw it out, like perhaps just check the median score when you're looking at these. Like, I know a lot of people like to look at 8, 12, 16, 20 rounds. Like, just compare the average to the median, and that'll help you, like, if there's some truly outlier stuff. Because if you can't get even granular, like if you're not pulling it yourself to get shot by shot or even just round by round, hole by hole, there's some fat you just cannot trim, which can just really screw stuff up. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little different at the top. Like I said, I was close, but I actually went to Viktor Hovland to start my card at 20-1. I really just couldn't get past the fact that I know off the tee is not anything wild here, but he's got the distance and the accuracy for his distance. So I'm not concerned that it's going to hurt him. And I actually went back and looked at other courses that he's played that de-emphasize off the tee, specifically distance. And he struck the ball very well there. I think I looked at Heritage, and he played here last year and he gained over half a stroke around off the tee. At RBC Heritage last year, he gained close to a stroke off the tee at that course, which is just wild. And he continues, obviously, we know his iron game, which is the most important thing for me this week. So that gets to the short game. We're very well aware of his shortcomings there, but I think I made him closer to 16-1. So the 20-1 was worth the grab. I've been on him twice earlier this year, and it's, I try not to let that type of stuff stop me from betting a golfer. Like, he's not this prolific winner yet, but he very well could be. He's actually not a terrible putter. He has his moments, but I think he has also shown he can putt well enough to win. He's putted almost over a stroke around multiple times just in the last 6 months. So I think that is there. It's just, do we get it? Which I don't know. That's hard to say, right? But I think it's there enough where the around the green is the big concern. Hopefully he can hit an above amount of greens in regulation compared to the field. Use those irons to his advantage. Less chips, the better, right? So that's kind of where I'm at with Hovland.
I like that call. And I think another thing that I'd say about Hovland is like the thing that keeps hurting his projections is his really, really bad around the green play. And even with around the green being a 22% weight this week, Hovland still is the 3rd best projected golfer in the models. So it sort of speaks like volumes to how great he is in every other aspect of the game. And then the other thing is when he does have the best performances, when he has his ceiling performances, it's because his ball striking is so good that he's just going to have fewer around the green shots than basically anybody else in the field. So his ceiling is very, very correlated to, or I should say inversely correlated with how often he has to use his biggest weakness. And in that regard, like if you had to pick a weakness for someone to have, it should be around the green play. Like it's a lot easier to hide a bad short game when you're playing really well than it is to hide bad putting. You're always going to have to hit putts. You're not always going to have to hit key short game shots. So I always like outright bets on Hovland for that reason. Like I almost think that he's consistently a better outright bet than he is a DraftKings play or something like that, unless of course he's contrarian. Like, ownership aside, this discussion is just because, like, as we just pointed out, like, if he doesn't have the ball striking, okay, now he's leaning more on the around the green play, which maybe means that he's a little bit more likely to miss the cut than some other guys in this area. But when everything's clicking, he's really, really difficult to beat just because he has fewer shots from his weakness.
Yeah, it's the only part of the game that you can essentially erase if you're hitting your irons amazingly. Like, of course, yeah, is he going to hit every green? Most likely not. But he has the ability with his irons to hit an abnormal amount of greens. Like, you can't erase putt it like you hole out occasionally. You hit par threes where you take the driver out of your hand or certain holes, but you're still hitting off the tee. You're still hitting a long distance shot. You're still hitting an iron on every hole, whether it's between 100 yards and 200 yards. Like, you can literally eliminate around the green, which is still rare, but you get my point, right? Like, you can't do that with the other. So like you said, that's if you're going to be deficient in an area in golf, especially as a professional, that is the one to be, in my opinion. So I'll hop down real quick. I'm going to skip two guys. I'll briefly touch on them. I bet Taylor Gooch at 40-1. And I bet Tommy Fleetwood at 40-1 as well. Again, it's just kind of some ball striking and iron play. I think Fleetwood seems to kind of be finding his rhythm. He was out in the woods for a while. Perhaps that good Sunday at the PGA Championship is a sign. Like, that was his best irons at the PGA Championship in some time, dating back to early January, but that was in Europe with much different fields. But that brings me to a golfer you're on as well. So I'll let you start with Cameron Tringali.
Yeah, real quick before I talk about Tringali, it's actually interesting. Fleetwood and Gooch, in my baseline strokes game profiles, they're almost identical golfers outside of strokes gained driving accuracy. Fleetwood is very positive, Gooch is negative. Other than that, like, Fleetwood has a tiny edge in distance, Gooch has a tiny edge in approach play, and a tiny edge in around the green play. But like, we're talking 0.02 different in around the green play and 0.01 different with putting. It's kind of remarkable how similar they are in that regard. The big difference there is Gooch is a much more volatile player. So I like the number for both of those guys, with Fleetwood basically being a slightly better player, but Gooch being a slightly more volatile, or a significantly more volatile player. And so I feel like his ceiling more than makes up for the slight difference in baseline talent level with Fleetwood. But moving on to Tringali, he's sort of exhibit A of somebody who's going to benefit from this course fit model. Like, he's inaccurate off the tee, but that doesn't matter a ton. He's positive in distance, but again, that doesn't matter a ton. Where he really shines is his approach play and his around the green play, both of which are quite predictive this week. He's also a very good putter at plus 0.21 per round. So everything about that is sort of a very good course fit. Like I mentioned, he's sort of grouped with Hoagie and Munoz and Varner and Kirk from a baseline talent perspective, but he's above everyone except for Brian Harman in this price tier in a course fit perspective. So very much like Tringali in that sense. And then the other thing is he's a pretty volatile player for this price range. So all of those reasons I like Tringali. And quite frankly, like the other guys that I'm mentioning here, they all have shorter odds. So the fact that we can get a number like 100-1 on Tringali, I think, is really, really beneficial. And that sort of leads me into the next player that I have in this exact same price, a guy that I would have like almost guaranteed that I would not have bet this season. It's Patrick Reed at 100-1. And
right.
You know, I mentioned that Tringali is a course fit specialist, but his difference is 0.79 baseline strokes gained to 1.12. Patrick Reed's is insane. 0.5 per round baseline, 1.25 course fit expected strokes gained. When you dive into the baseline strokes gained profile, you understand why. He's short off the tee. He's inaccurate off the tee. He's barely better than neutral with his irons, and yet he's elite around the green, in the top 10 in this field short game. And the only player in this field with a better baseline putting is Denny McCarthy, who is the best putter in the world and probably one of the best putters of all time. So it just gives you a sense of how great Patrick Reed is on and around the greens. So if this course fit model is right, as we have every reason to believe that it is, because it's a very strong model built off years and years of data now. Reed really, really sets up well here. And you can even look at past winners like Kevin Na to understand why. Like Reed and Kevin Na, they have pretty darn similar baseline strokes game profiles. The difference being Na is worse off the tee, better with his irons, and worse putting. Other than that, they're pretty darn similar. And you're getting a much, much, much better price on Reed. Also worth noting that, like, we've seen some flashes from Patrick Reed. He played well in the PGA Championship, has a very nice volatility rating at 53 for this price range. So there's just a lot to like here for him. And, we've finally gotten to a point where the name recognition is not keeping his odds between like 50 and 70 to 1. He's all the way up to 100.
Yeah, it does feel like a spot for him. I actually like to find spots like this. I couldn't quite get there with Reed, but he does fit that. Like, I'm looking at a guy who's just been struggling off the tee. Not horrid. I mean, it's kind of bad. It's been bad at times, and we like to mock him for the PXG clubs and all that fun stuff. But but now you come to a course where just hopefully that Achilles heel of his this year isn't as bad, and then you can let, like you mentioned, the elite short game just take over. Just be okay with your irons, be okay with your driver. Like, obviously, just keep it in play. You're not behind trees and whatever. And yeah, this is like that get right spot you're kind of looking for a guy like Patrick Reed.
Yeah, and I think another like point in favor of an outright bet on him is, like, he's somebody that if you find him in contention, you think, okay, the issues that have been plaguing him, they're less likely to continue. Like, I think that he can get it done there, and he's just, especially because like he's so strong on and around the greens that he even knows, like, he doesn't have to be great elsewhere. He just has to survive elsewhere. And so when he is doing that, like, it's a lot easier to maintain that level of play than somebody like Mito in the PGA Championship, who's like playing so far above his baseline that it's more difficult for him to then sustain that.
Right. No, I totally agree. So yeah, hopefully we can find a winner this week. We were very close last week. For both of us, I kind of hope it's Cameron Tringali getting his first win in 12-year career, I believe. I think he was back 2010. I think that would be lovely for him and for us. He reminds me of Munoz a couple weeks ago. Like, he's made like 6-7 straight cuts in a row. Nothing crazy, but there's enough little teases in there. And then you get to a course like I thought Munoz was at TPC Craig Ranch, that kind of just suits better. Unfortunately, Munoz couldn't close for me either at 95 to 1. So hopefully we can find that diamond in the rough this week. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, we are hosted by FTNBets.com. Head on over there. Sign up to get all of our picks as well as Matt's picks. Kyle Murray will have some picks in there as well. And we would love for you to join us in the Discord. So use promo code BogeyFreeAxis. Alex, if you want to shout out your promo code as well.
I don't even have one, so we're all good there.
We'll have to get you one then. But definitely use a promo code. They're all over. Again, that is Axis or Bogey Free. And we hope to see you soon.